Alrighty, so we're back, and today I'm going to be talking about Chirrut. Now, Chirrut was the leader that launched my YouTube channel. It was an early video I made. It's a leader that I've really enjoyed building and playing with over the last few sets. He hasn't gotten a ton of help, especially recently, but he does still have some game just purely based on his very interesting leader side ability, and you can build around it quite effectively. So I'm going to be doing a deep dive on Chirrut today. If you would like to see updates to this deck or updates to any decks that I make, do check out my Patreon. I have a lot going on there, and please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It helps out the channel a ton. All right. So let's review the table of contents here. So talk about why play Chirrut, why am I playing it with red in particular. Chirrut as a whole right now, I wouldn't say he's like a meta crusher. I'm not gonna go out here and claim that this is the best deck in the game. It is not, but he's fun. He has some very interesting mechanics. He can definitely win games into some of the better decks in the format. But don't expect to take this and just kind of crush everything. That's not where we're at right now. But I do have a lot of high hopes for this guy in the future. We've already seen some key arts in set 5 that feature Chirrut on them. It's also a set that will be very much focused on force. So hopefully we get more force interaction. And as we're going to see in this video, force is a major theme for Chirrut, and he is one of the best enablers for force in the game. So we'll do a force overview, then we'll break down the whole deck list card by card. I'm going to do a 2-drop deep dive. I think that's always kind of important just to get an idea of what it is we're doing in our early turns. We'll talk about the leader ability briefly, the leader side, and then we'll talk about the flip turn, which is kind of the key point of Chirrut. We'll do an interaction overview, and then we'll talk about sideboards, and finally other considerations, which is cards that are not currently in the deck, but cards I'd be looking at and recommend you look at if you are continuing to work on Chirrut in the future. All right, so why Chirrut? Well, mention it briefly, but force is a big part of it. So he is a 5-cost flip leader that has the force trait, right? So that is important. There are others, right? Quinlan is a big one right now who's very much meta relevant, and in part it is because he's an early force leader. Chirrut, while having that force trait, has something else that's really important, and that is when he flips, he's kind of unkillable for the most part, at least immediately. There are a few things that can kill it immediately. Usually that's like blue removal, things like takedown, power of the dark side. If he's alone, these can kill him, but damage won't. So you usually can create a turn with him where you have that force trait enabled. Him being in blue means that he gets immediate access to a lot of force payoffs. Notably, almost every force payoff in the game, other than force throw, is in blue for heroes. It's a big reason why we like it. So that is a big thing with Chirrut. It's just that unkillable force enabling plus the color to utilize those force payoffs, and that's what we're trying to build around. We're trying to maximize his unit side to create a very important threat in the game to help either close games out or bridge us to the hero blue top end. And then why am I pairing it with red specifically? And this one's easier to explain. It's force throw. So force throw is actually the best force payoff in the game, probably not even close. And we want that card. Like, I want force throw in this deck. It's been talked about why not play force throw out of aspect with Chirrut. Maybe you get another color and then you just play force throw for 3. I just don't think force throw is a particularly good card when it costs 3. The whole reason it's kind of broken is because it costs 1, and that's what we want. We want to create very impactful flip turns with Chirrut that involve force throw in conjunction with some other cards. We also do get access to Tarkintown, which is probably the best base in the game right now. And although we don't enable it as well as a lot of other leaders do with no pings and stuff like that, it's still a very important reactive card when people are trying to trade into your units. And then as well as like being able to finish off things that maybe force throw couldn't, or any of our damage might not be able to. And it's good against like ambush units, right? So it's just an important card. finally, and we'll see it later, but like the best 2-drops in here are red for the most part, right? We get A-Wing, we get Sabine, so it just helps kind of give us access to important cards. And then let's talk about the force payoffs here. So I'm playing 4 cards in this deck that pay off using the force, and force throw is a major part of it. Force throw has been talked about ad nauseum because it's a very meta card right now in Quinlan, but the card is absolutely crazy, costing 1, and it's going to be online a lot in this deck, not just with Chirrut, but with other units we play. Jedi Lightsaber, though, is a very important one for Chirrut, because the whole idea here with Chirrut is that against a lot of decks, he will never be killed, right? People will try to race him, but it's very difficult to remove him off the board unless you are playing a controlling strategy or want to waste tons and tons of damage into him. And Jedi Lightsaber turns him into an absolute monster. I mean, it turns everything into an absolute monster, but when your guy is unkillable and can hit for 6 or delete any unit with 8 or less life, right? So with Jedi Lightsaber on Chirrut, he can now one-shot almost every leader in the game, up to Darth Vader. Like, he can't kill Yoda or Palpatine in one shot, no, but he can do basically everything else. Jedi Lightsaber also, of course, can hostage a lot of leaders. If you can get this on a unit, not even specifically Chirrut, but like you put it on any unit, and now all of a sudden it can block a leader from flipping or something. And when you put it on a force unit, even Yoda can now kill 7 health leaders. So it's a very important card in the strategy, and it's much less risky in Chirrut than it is in basically any other deck, because Chirrut is invincible when you flip him. So even if your opponent barrages him for 7 damage, you can then put the lightsaber on him, and all of a sudden, bam, he can't die that turn, and he now has 8 health, and they would need to do more damage to him next turn, in which case he would still be alive and potentially be rescued by something else. And that's what these other 2 cards can do. Force is with me, and probably the second best force payoff in the game right now. It's like a wing leader and fleet lieutenant wrapped into one. That also gives you a shield when it's a force unit. Again, very important with Chirrut, right? And like, this lets you race. You don't even need to use that shield to trade into something. You can just go base, and now all of a sudden, it's going to take a metric ton of interaction from your opponent to get rid of the Chirrut. And of course, you can put this on other units and diversify your Chirruts out. You can still forces with me some random unit like a Sabine. All of a sudden, you have a giant Sabine with a shield, and you have Chirrut in play, and you've diversified. And then It Binds All Things is kind of the last one here for force payoffs with, this one's a little more tricky to pull off. It doesn't always work out, but 2 cost to deal 3 and heal 3 is quite powerful when it does work. If your opponent's trying to remove one of your units, and you can do this and kill something of your opponent's, it can be very powerful. And of course, once again, it's the easiest to use with Chirrut because he can soak up over lethal damage, right? Not a lot of people are putting 3 damage into your Yoda with the plan to like kill it over 2 attacks, but if people do need to remove Chirrut, or even better, if you use Chirrut to attack into one of your opponent's units, it takes damage back, and then you can heal all that damage and kill something, rescue it from dying, right? Your opponent thinks it's going to be dead, it has 6 on it, bam, now it's back down to 3 on it, it won't die that turn, you kill something they have. So It Binds has a lot of upside, but it's definitely the one that has the lowest floor here. It does not always work out. All right, let's take a look at the rest of the deck list. I won't recover the force stuff, but we've got, as our turn 1 plays, A-Wing, Hera, Restored Arc, and Sabine. I'll talk about these 4 cards in more detail in a moment, but we have another utility card here in Covering the Wing, and it's kind of similar to It Binds in this sense, right? But the card is quite powerful at keeping a unit alive. Again, a lot of this stuff works just really well with Chirrut because there's very little risk involved with Chirrut because of his invincibility text. So we're adding a little more, like, we call it Voltron potential to Chirrut. We have more ways to buff him with Covering the Wing, so it's not just like the lightsaber and the forces with me. In our 3 drops, we have a lot of them. We'll do Fleet Lieutenant and Wing Leader first. They're kind of our key follow-up plays to our turn 1, especially when we're trying to aggro. And this deck is an aggro deck. Don't get me wrong about that. It is not the fastest aggro deck, and you'll see we do have a decent amount of interaction because of that, because we can't race every deck, but in a lot of cases, we are trying to beat pressuring, and Fleet Lieutenant is, of course, a fantastic follow-up to a turn 1 Rebel. Note, every turn 1 play we play is a Rebel because of that, and it lets you usually maintain initiative going into the next turn. Wing Leader, not so much a turn 2 play, although against certain decks, you can certainly just run with it, because if it sticks, if you're able to buff your turn 1 play, you can get a lot of advantage. But it is, in a lot of cases, being used as a Chirrut turn play where, you don't have Jedi Lightsaber, but we now have another way to buff him. And remember, he's a Rebel too, so Wing Leader works on him. It protects from things like Power of the Dark Side, which is really nice. And then our 3 drops that don't require other units to stick, and that's really important. You want one of these usually in your opening hand because you can't guarantee your turn 1 play will stick. It's Cassian, who is just a crazy good card. He's like a 3 of in basically any red hero deck. Again, he's a Rebel too, so you have that utility with Fleet Lieutenant and Wing Leader. And then he is also a very helpful card in grinding late game. I've won many games after your opponent can stabilize, but you have that last turn of being able to push damage, and you do something like Cassian Lightsaber and hit for 6, or Cassian Wing Leader and hit for 5, or Cassian Forces with me, right? You just have that option to do burst damage with all your pumps. Sabine's Masterpiece, a card that I didn't think I would like as much, but it actually has played pretty well in this deck. The Restore 2 is not nothing. Like, if this card sticks in space against more dominant ground games, it can do a lot. And that ping can be useful too. The follow-up into like from an A-Wing or Sabine, where it does turn on your Tarkintown. It's not like the cleanest turn 2 in a lot of situations, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of punishes for this card. It's why it's only a 2 of. It's why we play a lot of other 3 drops. And Yoda is the last one, and Yoda is very important in this deck because it's the earliest we can turn on all this force synergy. Like, even just Yoda into Forces with me can be a very powerful turn 2, turn 3 play. Yoda with Force Throw plus another 3 drop can be a really powerful play, and even Yoda Lightsaber against certain decks that you don't think can interact with that, and all of a sudden you are just in control of the ground. Last 3 drop here, it's not a unit, but it's Open Fire, and the reason this is here, and we'll cover interaction a little more later, but Falcons are kind of everywhere. Space aggro is an important part of this meta, and being able to go cross arena into space and trade even with those units, like, that's the key with Open Fire. That it hasn't been very good the last couple sets because gameplay has really been dominated on the ground, and people have been proactively putting 5 health units as their turn 2 plays. Look at Cassian, right? Like, these are the cards that people play on the ground, but there are no 3/5s in space right now. Well, there's like 1, but it's not allowed to attack. But for the most part, Open Fire does trade even with the cards that people play in space. It kills most 3-drop space units, unlike 3-drop ground units. So we don't have to wait until takedown, where we usually end up trading down in resources. We can now trade even, and that's really nice. As in our 4-drop slots, we have, besides Forces with me, which we covered, K2 and Kanan. So Kanan, again, we want Force. Like, we have a lot of cards that rely on that, so we are just playing a lot of Force units, even ones that are in play before Chirrut. And it's nice to have even before flipping, because let's say you have this Force Throw, and you're on your flip turn. Well, if you haven't stuck a Force unit yet, then you have to flip before you can activate any of your cards. And sometimes that gives your opponent a very important action. They can hit for a ton of damage or whatever it may be. But if you have Kanan, you can already preemptively do something like Force Throw, chuck a Luke and kill something massive, or Forces with me on the Kanan and kill a Sabine or something. So you have access to quicker Force payoffs as opposed to needing to wait that extra action for Chirrut. And he also heals, so in addition to Yoda, Kanan curves can help you race into space aggro, especially if you then add in interaction on the flip turn with things like Force Throw, Open Fire, or like it binds to kill a space unit, and all of a sudden you're doing just enough interaction while healing on the ground. So Kanan's been great. K2, it helps mostly into control decks. I added these because the main deck package of hand disruption is pretty light if it's just Force Throw, but the games where you open K2 Force Throw are much better into control decks because you can get that a little bit of that extra redundancy. And of course, he can push a lot of damage. He's a rebel too, so he does decent. Like, we need a couple extra 4-drops. He's the one I landed on. There's a few other options you could look at too, though. And then rounding at the top of the curve is Obi and Luke. So this is for the cases where we aren't trying to finish games early. And in a lot of cases, even when we are the aggro, because we don't pump as much damage as things like Sabine, games can drag on a bit. And Obi is great when he helps you draw a card. He's also kind of impervious to a lot of popular removal. No Felda Dragon, no Takedown for Obi is pretty nice. And he does, of course, into aggro decks, help stabilize you. And it's nice late in the game when games draw out to be able to do like 2 drops and Obi together and like put enough threat into play without overextending yourself. And then Luke, of course, is like the best blue card in the game, and he performs like double duty, right? He's good against aggro. If we're able to stabilize and he comes into play and they don't kill you immediately, you will usually just outrace them because of his restore. He's good into control decks because even they need to play threats, and he can kill most of the threats other than giant capital ships, but him in conjunction with some other thing can often do that. And then he does just demand immediate answers, in which case you usually can rebuild after him. So just a very important card that kind of closes out what is an aggressive shell. Like, he is not bad when you are aggroing either, and he's not bad into control strategies. So he's just kind of good all the time. And he can also be your 7-cost force throw, which means you're 1 shot for other leaders. And something that you do in Chirrut much more often, I think, than you do in something like Quinlan is self force throw, just to stay ahead on board and help you close out with Chirrut specifically, because Chirrut, lightsaber, force throw, Luke, kill your leader is and now smack, smack, smack is like often a winning line. Okay, we'll talk about the sideboard a little later. So here's the 2 drops. I promise we talk about it. So we're split basically in the middle between space and ground. I don't think I need to sell you on Sabine. It's just basically the best thing you can play here. A-Wing is the one that punches the hardest, and Restored Arc is just fine, and that Restore can help. And all of these are rebels. They're all good follow-ups with Fleet Lieutenant. We use Fleet Lieutenant often to trade up if we can into some units, especially in space. If we go first, it's very difficult to like lose that trade when you have Fleet Lieutenant. And then Hera's like the last one I've added here, and I'm not like necessarily sold on it. It's just kind of the one that had the most utility, right? Because you're able to pilot it or just play it on the ground as like a not embarrassing unit. And I did want a rebel in this slot, primarily because I keep saying it, the Fleet Lieutenant synergy and wing leader stuff. But a couple others I've been looking at are Jyn Erso. That would mostly replace the Hera slot just because it hits harder. And then Regional Governor, a card I've been interested in and I think could see more play, especially when people are playing space more often. And it's more easy to protect it. Now, of course, it is not an aggressive card at all and has none of the rebel synergy, but it can really spike some games. It has late game interaction or potential against controlling decks where you can block key removal or even something like Super Laser Blast late in the game. And of course, if you can snipe your opponent's turn 1 play, especially maybe they're playing like Falcons and that's like in Han and you just want to like guess Falcon and maybe they just don't have another ship or something. So there's cool things you can do with Regional Governor. I'm opting not to include it yet and just sticking a little more to like the rebel aggressive nature of the deck, but there is a world where Regional Governor can be pretty good. All right, so let's briefly talk about this guy's leader side ability, which frankly is not very good. It's a pretty bad ability, but its most useful thing to do with it is usually Action Pass. That is the thing I do the most with it, is just use it to stall an action, force your opponent to do something. But there's a little bit of synergy with something like It Binds All Things, right? You can buff the unit so that it can soak up a little extra damage that turn, something like a Yoda, right? Then that thing like Yoda can attack into something that has 4 and then soak that damage, and then you can heal it off and deal a bunch of damage to something. So there's some synergy there. There's synergy with protecting it from thresholds like takedown, for instance. So okay, you've got your turn 1 ship, or I mean, it's not turn 1. It's the 4 resource turn. You have a ship that you can wing leader, for instance. But if you do that and they take down, you basically blown out completely. So you opt to buff the ship's health first. If they take down at that point, you've missed some damage, but then you'll just play like a 4-drop or something. You'll play Kanan. But if they do something that takes them out of resources to play takedown, or they do something else, it actually doesn't even matter if they have resources to play takedown at that point. They do something, attack with something. Now you can wing leader, and all of a sudden your A-wing has 7 health, for instance, for the turn at least, and they can't use takedown. And maybe their whole plan was to use takedown on whatever you were playing, and maybe you've bricked their turn, or they have to do something like take down your wing leader. So very niche, but if you can use that health to create new breakpoints for removal sometimes. But yes, primarily this is an action pass. Now the flip turn, much different. So he's invincible. Just don't flip into obvious takedown or power the dark side. It's pretty easy to avoid that. You play cheap cards in this deck. He has action passing abilities, and you usually have units in play. Now, if your opponent's just going to sit there and pass with 4 resources or whatever it may be, just play another unit. If they keep passing, just claim and make them waste their whole turn, right? You don't have to just flip them into automatic removal, but against a lot of decks, he's pretty easy and pretty safe to just flip, and you can create a lot of different versions of very powerful turns, right? Jedi Lightsaber and Wing Leader are both buffs for him that can work in conjunction with covering the wing, and it binds all things, or even Force Throw, right? Force Throw will fit into basically any of these curves. Forces with me plus Force Throw, very powerful. And you don't, like I said earlier, you don't have to Forces with me the Chirrut in particular. Against decks with more interaction or ways to kill leaders more cleanly, you actually don't want to overcommit onto Chirrut himself. Like into hard control decks, I probably don't just like suit him up infinitely, because once he's dead, then I'm dead. But he does pose a very interesting threat for your opponent, so you do want to be cautious of just like overcommitting to him in particular. But against some decks where you know he's the guy, like he's not going anywhere, like we're just racing with him, then yes, just suit him up, go to town. Jedi Lightsaber on this guy can kill all the leaders if you need him. He can definitely help stabilize the board. Like you can create absolutely monumentally powerful flip turns with Chirrut because of how cheap the force payoffs are relative to their power, right? So in set 1, a big thing about Chirrut into like at the time one of the best decks in the game was Boba, is that Boba created monumental flip turns because he got to do extra resources, right? He would do like 8 resources on the 5 resource turn. Chirrut could never do that. He still needed to do 5 resources, but the 5 resources that Chirrut presented could actually be just as powerful, because cards like Force Throw, when they work with a Force unit in play, are worth much more than 1 resource. Or Jedi Lightsaber, for instance, on Chirrut is often worth much more than 3 resources. So you could match, in a lot of cases, the Boba flip turn with the Chirrut flip turn because of how powerful the Force payoffs were. And that's what we're trying to capitalize on here. We're trying to create a very impactful flip turn that can then carry us through the rest of the game. The cases where they don't are usually the cases where we're playing into control strategies, and that's where we do change up our strategy. We worry more about going a little wider and not overcommitting to any one unit in particular, and using our buffs when we know we can push damage with them. Otherwise, trying to not use them early, right? Things like Wing Leader, Forces with me, and Jedi Lightsaber are less powerful into control. Well, Wing Leader, still powerful into controlling strategies because he blocks the power of the dark side, but the other two, you really want to make sure that you can get as much value with them, that you're not just slamming them and then having your unit removed. But do try to plan out this flip turn as best you can. And these cards are very cheap. They can work in various puzzles. You can often play 3 cards that turn, and they're not the only things you can do, right? You can Chirrut, Force Throw, and play a Kanan, right? Like that's also good, right? And then maybe next turn you do something like Wing Leader, Jedi Lightsaber or something, and just create an absolutely incredible threat. So work around with these puzzles, see what cards you have to like piece together. And of course, it really matters what your opponent's doing too. If you have to interact with them before you even flip, then you do that. You open fire first, then you flip, then maybe you force throw, and just try to minimize the damage you're taking, because you know that if the game prolongs, they won't be able to interact with Chirrut, and you will win that way. All right, briefly, and we covered every card here, but the interaction. So like I said, you are an aggro deck, but you're not the fastest aggro deck, so you have to interact with the other aggro decks. And we have the cheap interaction like force throw, and it binds all things. Namely, these are the things that even if you're falling behind on your early by the flip turn, this is what can flip that on your opponent, because you're playing cheap cards that can punch way above their weight. But Fleet Lieutenant and Force with Me are also both cards that can be considered interaction. You don't have to go face with them. They both can create value trades for you, especially early. Forces with Me almost always, like, because it's giving you 2 experience and sometimes even a shield, it can very well just kill something cleanly. And then I've talked about open fire a decent amount, but it is an important card right now into space decks, right? If you play a 2-drop, they play something in space, and you just first action can kill that space unit so they can't pilot it. Can be quite good. So yes, I wish we didn't need to play as much interaction, worry about trading as much, but you are not the fastest deck in the game, and as such, you have to use these things. And the real good thing about these cards is that they kind of do double duty. I mean, open fire doesn't, but Fleet Lieutenant and Force with me can both be cards that enable value trades, but they also can both push aggression, right? Force throw is so cheap that even if against aggro, very good. 1 cost can kill basically any unit if you target yourself, which you do quite often in this deck. But it can also be very good against control decks when you're trying to rip their hand up and trying to blow up important threats they have, and especially in conjunction with something like Tarkintown. So we do try to find as much utility in our interaction as possible. All right, the sideboard, and this is a work in progress. This can change at any time, but I'm going to throw 1 tech in there for grindy games, and that's going to be in conjunction with 3 pillages. So we really do go hard on the discard plan post board with this deck. You can create very powerful flip turns, or like turn 3s into flip turns. If you do something like K2 into force throw pillage, the next turn can be very good, can really clean up their hands. You'll bring in Fells against any deck where there's targets for it. Vigilance and Redemption against aggro decks. And, you know, Redemption you can probably bring into a lot of matchups. It's just like a big threat that you can bring in, and it's quite nice. And speaking of healing, it's something I didn't mention about with It Binds. It's a very good card against Palpatine, actually. You can try to bait them into, like, throwing something at one of your units and then heal it, and then maybe brick their flip turn. So didn't mention that. You can do that with Redemption too, but of course Redemption would then get stolen by Palp, which is sometimes okay if they were trying to steal something on the ground, but keep that in mind. But yes, Vigilance, Redemption for any decks that you would need healing, but also you can bring those Redemptions in a lot of the time elsewhere. And yeah, so I'll keep working on this sideboard, but this feels decent right now. And the last part here is some other cards to look at. So Covert Strength is another interesting card. It's like a pseudo It Binds all things. Of course, it's easier to use, but has less upside, but it's worth a consideration. Mystic Reflection, a card that probably would have been better if people were playing a lot of Lurking TIE Phantoms and 7th Fleet Defenders, but those cards are not that popular right now. But if they were, Mystic Reflection, 1 cost to kill them with a force unit is very good. Concord Dawn, Space Sentinel, more defensive, certainly worth consideration here. Especially if we try to move off of the Wing Leader Fleet Lieutenant package, we have more space for 3 drops. Disabling Fang Fighter, upgrade hate. It would be good into Bosk. It would be potentially good into decks that are trying to just Chewbacca you. Red 5 would be like the card that is just, the floor is high, right? Like it's a 3/4 that costs 3. It's like a higher floor than something like Sabine's Masterpiece, which is in the deck right now. And then Village Protector is similar to Concord Dawn. It would turn the deck more defensive. It would make it less rebel focused, but those are cards that you can consider Cham Syndulla would be a decent card to play against any ramp decks. It's actually not amazing into Han, primarily because you play it the turn but they're probably going to flip that turn, right? If you're both on 5, for instance, they're gonna Han, you can play Cham, but now your turn is basically tapped out. Now, if they resupplied, it's going to be a similar situation. On the 4 resource turn, they will have 5. They'll use their Han ability. You can Cham for sure, go to 5, but then they flip Han. Han kills Cham Syndulla, and they still get to do a 7. They get a bit of a value trade there. He's okay, but he's not like a crusher into Han in this deck. He's much better when you play Anakin into Han, because then you get to actually flip a unit that can really pose a big threat to the Han flip turn, because you have a really big leader. But Chirrut is not a big leader, and you won't have any resources to use his force interaction, and he might just die, right? Like if they go to 7 and then they Han your Chirrut, and then you have no resources to do anything that turn, you could have a problem. But Cham is really good into like resupply villain decks or any ramp deck other than Han for the most part. And I said a lot of things about it not being great into Han. It's not terrible. It's okay. Takedown, if you want more interaction. Record, not a card I've actually ever played in Chirrut, but I was like scrolling through. I was like, well, this could be different, like especially if we don't want to go all the way up to Luke. Chewbacca would be a pretty good grindy card if we wanted to slow down the deck and be a little more top heavy. And in a similar vein, that would be like things like Crate Dragon and Profundity if you wanted like more top end, especially into control decks. I think Crate Dragon would be my vote, because Profundity is a huge blowout if your opponent's playing something like No Glory only results. But these are a handful of cards I'm considering, and you can definitely look at some more. And yeah, I'll be updating this deck over time. You can see updates to it and other decks on Patreon. And yeah, let me know what you think of Chirrut. I have a lot of hope that he will get some help in the next set as well, and be excited to keep building around him. And until next time, take care.